Hello, and welcome to Book Circle. I'm Earl Weinberg. This time we will continue our reading of Aunt Jenny and the Delayed Quest by Jim Burrows. Aunt Jenny and her protege Sasha and their companions have just crossed the border into the land of Dream. The leafy canopy blocked the glow of clouds, the rays of sunset. The forest was deep and dark and alive with sights almost seen, with sounds almost heard. It moved, it whispered, chittered, murmured, never in their sight, never with any voice. Ahead, a light, blood red, broke through. Fiery orange joined it, lapping like flames. Yellow fluttered in, violet bloomed. Light burst through the foliage, illuminating it. Leaves transformed from dark shapes to greens and golds and reds and oranges, like paint splattered by an exuberant child. Mists crept in among the paths, mists of gray and white, multicolored mists illuminated by the shifting colors of fire, of sunset, of a mad, living kaleidoscope. Thick, glowing mist enveloped and enshrouded them, then thinned, drew back, faded. They emerged onto a broad plain surrounded by mountains, scattered with fields and trees, villages, lone cots, and distant cities. The entire sky above was a riot of swirling sunset light scattered against a field of black and purple so dark it seemed deeper than the black. Someone gave Van Gogh LSD and Parrish's paints, Aunt Jenny heard herself whisper. She shook her head to clear it, then, regretting that, held it very, very still. "Oh, wow," gasped Sasha softly beside her. Three drew up next to them in silence. "Just about," said Jenny. A figure walked towards them, pushing through a tall field of golden grain, glistering gold, hard and shiny. He was big, tall and broad, dark and shadow-shrouded in the riotous light, reflecting the night-dark sky or the night-dark portions of the sky. He moved with a slow, gentle grace, a dark, gentle giant of a man. A familiar figure, a familiar sway. Aunt Jenny was running towards him, unaware of dismounting. She leapt, her arms, her legs enwrapping him. "Tom!" someone yelled, wept, exulted, shouted, until the mountains echoed, cried out in her voice. Tears streamed down her cheeks. Silence as her kiss devoured him. Arms, strong, young, gentle, powerful arms, enwrapped her, cradled her. After an eternity or two, they released her, set her down. Her feet touched the ground and crumpled beneath her. She knelt, sat back upon her heels, and wept. Joy, sadness, loss, heartache, and love consumed her. He squatted down, took her cheek in a big brown hand. His eyes, like liquid dark chocolate, looked into hers. He smiled, that brilliant smile. His voice, soft as silk, deep as night, caressed her. "No time," he said. "Be well. Do good." He paused. "Later, my love," and faded like a dream, a dissipating mist, and was gone. "Tom," Jenny uttered, and wept. A hand, a gentle hand, lay upon her shoulder. A smaller one rested on the other. "That was Dr. Tom?" asked Sasha's voice somewhere high above her. She nodded. "As he was before the sickness. He was hot. We were young once, and strong, and healthy." "You," opined little Dickens from her bag. Rudy whined. "Let them out of their carriers. a leash for Rudy, she whispered with all the voice she seemed to have left. But I'll be okay. She inhaled, seemingly for the first time ever. She closed her eyes, wiped her tears, and reopened them as she stood. She inhaled deeply and walked back to the horses, to Sasha, 3, and the little ones. She breathed deeply and shook her head. He was huge. You're tall, taller than me. He dwarfed you. 6'5", 250 pounds, all muscle and skin like silk until he wasted away, she heard herself answering. Wow. She stroked the cheek of her horse. All those years, she said softly. Welcome to Dream. If your dreams are populated by tall, dark, and handsome there, then yeah. Usually they're haunted by him at the end. Young, healthy Dr. Tom hasn't visited my dreams in a while, and never like that. She wrapped her arms around herself. But we came here not for my Tom, but for Vrayan's queen. Vivian, whispered Sasha in awe. Yes, muttered Aunt Jenny, opening her eyes, and was greeted by the sight that had overwhelmed Sasha. Yes, said the Queen, wrapped in glory. You, added Dickens. Vivian? Asked Aunt Jenny of the tall, regal woman in her many-colored robes, a tiny tiara and scattered gems sparkling in her long jet-black hair. Yes, great Jennifer. Did you bring my Tom? She stammered, looking for her lost wits. I did. It seemed balanced. Oh? Vrayan wouldn't have had me if you had come in time. He would not have needed me with you by his side. He wouldn't have lost me either. I died fighting by his side. You wouldn't have found your Dr. Tom had you not stayed. He would not have died as he did had you come at the appointed time. What? Asked Aunt Jenny, bewildered. The Hockomock fever. 'Tis naught but the blight leaked into mortal lands. The blight came when she was not held back. He was in the Hockomock hills for you. Aunt Jenny staggered. The dream landscape spun around her. You and Vrayan would never have lost what you did not have, but for... Vivian let the words hang and echo in the swirling dream air. Aunt Jenny was kneeling again, crying. Cold noses and small warm bodies nuzzled her, soft hands rested on her shoulders. This all had happened before. She wiped her eyes and stood to face the queen who was, the queen whose death weighed her down. It was a struggle to stand. The past cannot be undone. It might, mayhap, be redeemed. Our dooms lifted, our debts repaid, Vivian pronounced. Aunt Jenny stood straight and tall, flanked by Sasha and 3, Big Tom and Rudy. You called us here? She asked with what seemed like all her remaining strength. I did. Perhaps together we can achieve one of your goals, the sword. Aunt Jenny nodded, sadly, striving to find her lost resolve. Under the gaze of the king's eye, I may be able to go forth from here and venture to where the sword was drowned in poisoned waters, whence no living hand may grasp it. The gem throbbed with a cold heat against her skin. She laid her hand upon her jacket and pressed it closer. Under its gaze? Yes. With that, Vivian gestured in her direction, and Aunt Jenny watched, as much as experienced, as her jacket and shirt unbuttoned, exposing the amulet to her palm. The chain around her neck shortened and pulled the gem slowly up toward her throat. The chain twisted and reformed, shortened, widened, crept out from beneath Jenny's faltering grasp. She found herself wearing a broad, ornate silver choker, the amethyst of the eye blazing with internal light. It must remain in contact with your flesh, and gaze upon me the while if we are to leave Dream together, declared the queen. Best we leave soon, before Dream too beguiles you and yours. Aunt Jenny observed as much as participated, as they moved Big Tom's basket-work carrier from Three's mount to hers and loaded Big Tom into it, then Rudy and his to Sasha's steed. They remounted, the queen sharing with Three, and turned their horses back toward the valley they had so recently quit. The chittering, murmuring forest, with its crawling shapes, sped by as they tolted through it. For Aunt Jenny it was all a blur as she strove to retain the feel of Dr. Tom in her arms, his scent in her nostrils. It was hard with the Queen's words echoing in her ears, never found, never lost. A decade or more of the wasting blight. Her head whirled. Beneath her seat the mare's strange, smooth gait barely felt. In but the blink of an eye, the swirl of passing woods, they found themselves on the last ridge, gazing out at the fen before them. There, below them, lay the corpses of 2 great dragons. Otherwise there was nothing but the haunted mire. The scout and Vivian in the lead, they made their way slowly down the hill toward where they'd last seen Morwenna, hoping to find her awaiting them, dreading to find her corpse. They arrived at the scene of carnage. One monster was clearly slain by Morwenna's arrows. The other was pierced by at least 2, but her slashing sword had clearly left its mark as well. The dragon's blood was dark, nearly black, but on its talons and dripping from its beak was blood as red as Jenny's own. Morwenna's? The stallion's? Closer looks showed the marks of battering hooves upon the carcass. Neither Morwenna nor the stallion was anywhere in sight. Aunt Jenny scanned the horizon for a glimpse. Shortly, Three called down from some nearby rocks. "Here, tracks!" When they reached him, he pointed to barely visible scuff marks. "That way!" He pointed, dusk by winterwards, across barren rocky hills. "Can't follow. Rock, no tracks." "Can you tell us any more?" Aunt Jenny asked anxiously. "Both hurt, both blood." "Chased by the 3rd dragon?" asked Sasha. "Leading it away, I'd wager," answered Aunt Jenny, beginning to come back to herself. "She gave the stallion its head. You may see them still, some day," pronounced the Queen. Aunt Jenny turned to look at her, to look through her, for Vivian was now slightly but clearly translucent. "We cannot follow. I dare not. Nor could I fetch the sword if we did," said Vivian with certainty. As Jenny and she realized the eye gazed at her, the Queen resumed a normal opacity. "Then we must ride on," Jenny declared, remounting and offering Three a hand up. Aunt Jenny closed her eyes, inhaled, and swallowed. "Damn!" She exhaled, opened her eyes, and swung up onto the saddle. Sasha remounted, and they turned dawnward at a miles-eating tolt. The ride back to Fenmarch Station seemed to go much faster than the trip to the foothills of Dream. They rode in silence, giving Aunt Jenny plenty of time to think about Morwenna riding off into who knows where after protecting her, to think about the parallels Vivian had drawn, her tardiness resulting in both of them finding husbands unforeseen in prophecy, and losing them in tragedies not meant to happen, to think about the absurdity of a world looking to her to save it. When they arrived at the station, without their most powerful steed, but with the dead Queen, they found themselves hastened on in a way that made Sasha's bum's rush seem leisurely. "Thank you for returning the mares. Your skiff awaits you. Godspeed," they said. Or was it God's speed? There was no telling, and no one seemed eager to discuss theology with her or to take any action that would delay her and her late majesty on their important mission to somewhere else. Vivian, too, was eager to be on her way, to see her king as soon as possible. Even Jenny felt the desire for speed. The responsibility to keep the queen in sight, or at least before the gaze of the king's eye, was weighing upon her. She worried about what would happen when she slept, or should they be attacked again. She was responsible for Vivian, Merlin's Vivian, once. Then the king's, now dead. Vivian, the queen who was. Morwenna was their best sailor, and she was somewhere else. Who knew where? Needs must. They would find a way. That was the job. Miracles and 6 impossible things before breakfast. Someone owed her breakfast. With Vivian guiding them, Aunt Jenny at the tiller, Sasha handling the lines, and 3 alert in the bow, they made good progress through the marshy Haysmire Channel to the Blackwater and downstream to King Vrain's place. There they found Chetters and the young man who had piloted the skiff from Vrain's boathouse awaiting them on the pier to guide them in and tie them off at the docks. "Your Majesty," Chetters bowed to Queen Vivian, ignoring Aunt Jenny and the rest of her party. "We have all been looking forward to your arrival. The king has asked me to bring you straight to him." And so they returned to the ramshackle old farmhouse, following the queen who was and her king's loyal retainer. They entered the farmhouse through the mudroom, the entry closest to the pier, made their way through the kitchens to the dining room, where Vrain was seated at the head of the table, having just finished his supper. The cook and the young man that they'd met in the fields when they first arrived were clearing the table. Vrain set down his wine-glass and lifted himself from his chair. He was barely standing by the time Vivian wrapped him in her arms. Chetters quickly hustled Aunt Jenny and the party toward the door in the main hall. "No," called Vivian. "She must remain and face us." Chetters harumphed. "The queen is only substantial in the sight of this," Aunt Jenny quietly informed him, touching the gem at her throat. Chetters reached out his hand. "Then you may leave it here." "No, I'm afraid not. It is only activated by my touch." "It's true," said the queen, still wrapping Vrain in her arms and her attention. "Well, then," conceded Chetters, and hustled the rest of the party away, clearly regretting he could not drive Jenny out with them. Aunt Jenny retreated alone to a chair in the furthest corner of the room and retrieved her knitting from her bag. Little Dickens only put up a token resistance before conceding it to her. Chetters returned. "Does madam require anything? Tea, perhaps?" "No, thank you. I'll just lose myself in my knitting." "Very well." Chetters departed. "Well," declared the king after some time, "if we cannot be rid of our chaperone, then there is nothing for it but to set sail for the Shattered Isle. Chetters!" "Yes, my lord," that worthy called out, quickly returning. "Have the Rook ready, then pack for a voyage across the lake." "Your lordship will be traveling?" "Aye. I may be infirm, but I shall not let that keep me from accompanying my queen, now that she has returned." "Yes, my lord. Certainly, my lord." Preparations for the journey took the better part of a day, during which time Aunt Jenny alternated between following the queen, keeping her stable, and trying to be of use, and trying to be inconspicuous off in a corner, doing her knitting or updating her commonplace book. Being of use was made much more difficult by the need to keep the gaze of the king's eye always upon Vivian. Nighttime even found her sleeping in a chair in the queen's corner. Her sleep, such as it was, ended suddenly as she awoke from a dream in which Dr. Tom once more returned to her, looking as whole and handsome as he had in the land of dream. She sat up with a start, her heart racing. "Troubling dreams?" asked Vivian. "No, not troubling. Perhaps a little exciting." She smiled dreamily. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to wake you. I don't sleep much these days, or rather, sleep does not offer much more rest than death itself. It is the waking I crave." "I see. But he deserves some rest. Come, Aunt Jenny, walk with me." The queen rose from the bed and moved soundlessly to the door. Aunt Jenny arose carefully, not to disturb the kitten asleep on the chair beside her, and followed the queen as she stepped silently out of the sleeping chamber. As they made their way down the corridor, Jenny became aware of the sound of her own feet and the creaking of floorboards. Even in her temporarily solid form, the dead queen made no sound as she passed. They reached the stairway, and Vivian turned and smiled before descending. With the moonlight through the window at the end of the corridor, all that lit her way, Jenny followed slowly and with care. As she reached the last few steps, there was a sudden clatter of nails upon hardwood, and Rudy came scampering down behind her. Compared with her own, but far from silent footsteps, he seemed an awful racket. The front door creaked as the queen opened it and stepped out. She held it for them and closed it silently once they were all on the porch. "Your Uncle Tom," Aunt Jenny winced. "Dr. Tom, or just Tom," she corrected automatically and sharper than she meant. "I'm sorry. The difference was important back home." "Your husband, then. He visited your exciting dream?" They reached the end of the porch and stepped down onto the pebbled path. Jenny stepped carefully, her bare feet testing for sharp rocks before she shifted her weight fully. "Yes," she sighed. Rudy scampered around her, rattling the pebbles. "I woke wondering hoping that it was really him, that he experienced it too. 'Tis hard to be sure, though dreams here beside the waters of the Black," she gestured off to their right, "dreams do have added power. Vrain came here just to dream of me, just to bring me close." Jenny caught up to the queen and walked beside her on the path leading to the pier. "This is all so surreal. A river that flows from dream, walking and talking with the Vivian, the Lady of the Lake, in the home of a lame fisherman king, wresting a magic ring," she held out her hand in front of her where the ring glittered in the moonshine, "from the mouth of a salmon, all to fetch a lost magical sword. I suppose if the children's stories of little Jenny's journey can be based upon the real-life adventures of my great-aunt Jenny as a girl, then my retirement, returning into some crazy patchwork quilt of bits and pieces like the Matter of Britain, isn't that much curiouser." She laughed. "You are the missing hero, after all, promised of prophecy and delayed by the pettiness of human jealousy." "Am I, really?" She turned to face the queen, to meet her eye to eye, only to look through her at the moon beyond. Jenny inhaled sharply as Vivian returned to solidity and smiled. Jenny laughed and laughed. Rudy pranced around her to hear it. "What so amuses you?" It seems so absurd, giving voice to my fears of the imposter syndrome." The queen looked puzzled, and Jenny continued, chuckling. "Hell, explaining the imposter syndrome to the ghost of the queen who was." She shook her head. She looked up into the night sky as if the words she was searching for were there. "The imposter syndrome is a pattern of human behavior, one well known to many of my day, wherein the person does not believe that her own accomplishments are real, her successes deserved. She fears, generally quietly, being found out as a fraud. It's sort of the reverse of the Dunning-Kruger effect, where someone of very little ability is convinced of their own cleverness and superiority, too foolish to know they are a fool." "And you have names for these things, this syndrome and effect?" "Yes. There's a lot of them going around, bleating know-nothing fools and capable folk doubting themselves. It's like a collective nightmare." She chuckled again. "She said to the ghost of the queen that she'd fetched out of dream on the back of a magical night-steed mare." "A night-steed, even a mare, isn't a true nightmare. No, they're quite different and far more dangerous." "Yes, I understand. It's just that I'm a librarian and a teacher. My head is full of stories and bits and pieces, and I can't help but see the world in terms of them. And when the world is the Halflands, well, Analogies, the irony, the wordplay, I can't avoid them. And two, as I said, it all seems unreal, surreal, hard to believe. She looked around her at the river, the pier they were standing on, the strange sky that usually acted so oddly, but now was behaving itself and looking like a normal night sky, with stars and a moon that might be just a tad too big, but familiar nonetheless. A little while ago, I killed a sea beast, a man-shaped thing, lunged and drove my sword right through him. I killed a thing that might be a person. I don't even know if it qualifies as a person. I killed it, him, with a sword. I'm a librarian, a teacher, a coach, a nurse, a retired librarian. I knit. I go for long walks in the woods with Rudy and my cats. I tutor girls and recommend books to them. I have them over for tea. My girls. No rabbits, dormice, or hatters. Just my girls. I don't drive swords through the hearts of things, of people. Yet here I am, consorting with elves and goddesses or demigods, riding into dreams, hugging my dead husband. I lunged, I told her, in the Italian mode, like it's a thing one does, the way you slay the sea beast, while the elven archer and the goddess handle the monsters who keep pursuing you. A thing you do while questing for swords and crowns, a thing you do like ranting to a ghost you brought out of dream. They call me the last queen of Avalon. You and your fisherman king call me the missing hero, the person responsible for our marriages, the deaths of spouses, the crippling of a king, for plague and monsters and fell beasts prowling the land. And now I'm doing these things, slaying beasts or men, fending off monsters, questing to save the world. Is it any wonder I doubt myself, feel like an imposter, a fraud? The choice seems to be that, or believing that this is all real, that it all makes sense, that I am the last queen. That's insane. They put you away for thoughts like that. The ring is on your finger. You're standing on the pier where the king's salmon spit it out. You wear the king's eye around your neck. You can feel its warmth. You see what it does for me. Your dog is at your feet. The wood of the pier presses up against those feet. The black flows by. The air is cool. It is all real as death. And death it is if you do not believe it real. Thank you. I am sorry that I was so harsh with you when we met. Never mind. No problem. We should probably sleep more before we sail in the morning, or at least I should. Perhaps, suggested the queen who was, we should go back by way of the kitchens. I didn't bother to visit them or to attend while others ate, and so kept you from eating properly. It was small of me, a petty cruelty. You should eat something. Thank you, replied Jenny. They found some bread, cheese, an apple, and some ale. When Jenny had eaten her ploughman's lunch, the queen smiled and led the way silently back to the bedchamber. Aunt Jenny fell asleep quickly and awoke feeling rested and warm, with her tom cat curled and warm and sleeping on her lap, with the vague feeling that her human Tom had visited her dreams again, another warm, dark presence. And we'll continue Aunt Jenny's adventures next time.